We welcome all of you who are interested in the true meaning of the Church of Christ Scientist and its timeless and indestructible reality. What is the Church of Christ Scientist? What does it mean to be a Christian Scientist? What is the Christ science, its nature, its operation, and its universal realm of self-government and self-organization? The Christian Scientist finds the answer to every right question within the structure and the substance of the Christian Science textbook, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy, through the impersonal divine principle which it teaches. Let us search for every answer from the textbook and not from people. In this talk, we shall see how the impersonal authority of the divine principle of Christian Science, as found in the textbook, reveals the scientific evolution of church government. Our speaker is well qualified to talk on this subject, as she's been holding classes and speaking for the Capillary Institute for many, many years. It is my pleasure to introduce Sue Bissonnette.
All right, I'd like to welcome you all and thank you all for coming, for responding to the invitation, and for taking part in this opportunity to look at a very important subject together. That subject is the subject of the Christian Science Church today. I think you all received the invitation, and you know that the title of this introductory talk is The Newly Emerging Form of the Christian Science Church Today, Love's Promise Fulfilled. I think what we need to see, first of all, as we begin, is that there is only one school of Christian Science, just as we shall see that there is only one church of Christian Science. But this issue of there being one school of Christian Science is a very important one to set straight right from the beginning, or else we may feel that there is a school that diverges from the one school, the school that Mrs. Eddy has given us. She says in Science and Health, she asks the question, is there more than one school of Christian Science? And answers, Christian Science is demonstrable. There can therefore be but one method in its teaching. Those who depart from this method forfeit their claims to belong to its school. In Rudimental Divine Science, she says, in reality there is and can be but one school of the science of mind healing. Any departure from science is an irreparable loss of science. Whatever is said and written correctly on this science originates from the principle and practice laid down in Science and Health. And then returning to the textbook again and to the first quote that I gave you, which is from the chapter Science, Theology, and Medicine, where she speaks about her discovery and sets forth that discovery. She says, "From the infinite one in Christian Science comes one principle and its infinite idea. And with this infinitude come spiritual rules, laws, and their demonstration." So we can see that either something is Christian Science or it is not Christian Science. And I invite you to listen today, to join today with me, to see if there is any point at which we would deviate from this one school. In other words, if there is any point at which we would deviate from the Christian Science textbook, and therefore from Christian Science. So I thank you for coming. I thank you for sharing this opportunity with me and invite you to discover the subject along with me. We come here together today then to reason about the things of science, to reason about Christian Science. And our great common denominator, even if we don't know each other well, or if we have only met momentarily, or if we are well known to each other, what we have in common is our love for Christian Science. That's what binds us together. Our love for Christian Science, for the Christian Science textbook, and our esteem for Mary Baker Eddy and what she has given to mankind in proclaiming, as she says of her own work, the gospel to this age. She brought the gospel to this age, as though we have almost a new restating of that whole gospel, that whole teaching of the Christ, of what the Christ was bringing to mankind. So it's an invitation really to come and let us reason together. And, you know, I feel that the fact that you are here is a wonderful proof of the working of the principle of Christian Science within you. Because insofar as we are schooled in that principle, and we have that principle within us, established within us, instituted within us, we are always safe. And we know that we are safe, and we can go anywhere, and we can listen to anything. We can listen to what others have to say and not be afraid that we will lose something, or that we will be tainted, or that we feel threatened by that we feel that Christian Science is threatened by that, or that if we go to a talk and listen to a speaker, or we take up a piece of literature and we read something about Christian Science, that we are not afraid that we offend Christian Science. But we bring really, as a true Christian Scientist, to every situation, to every opportunity, such as those that I mentioned, the quality of being a scientist, the quality of being able to weigh a subject, of being able to reason about a subject, of being able to follow a line of logic in a subject. We bring the whole quality of the principle and of what we understand about that principle to the situation. And so we are, in the truest sense, a scientist, a Christian Scientist. We bring our own present understanding of the divine principle of Christian Science to that situation, and we allow that principle to operate for us, to operate within us, to sort things out within us, to separate, to be able to to listen to a talk and separate. Is this the truth or isn't it the truth? Does it ring true or does it not ring true? And so I feel that insofar as we are grounded in the principle that the textbook teaches us, we are always safe. It's a terrifically freeing thing, a wonderfully freeing thing that we don't have, or we don't experience that freedom when we still feel we have to ask somebody else, can we do something? Can I, should I, ought I to go and listen to this talk? Or should I stay as far away from those people as possible? You see. And so asking the practitioner, asking the teacher, asking the board of directors, asking the president of the board, calling the mother church, checking with the ecclesiastical hierarchy to see, can I listen to what somebody says about Christian Science? Can I read what somebody writes about Christian Science? This is pathetic. Mm-hmm. It's pathetic, and it shows the state of the field today, that this field is not mature in the principle that Christian Science teaches. Mature enough to feel that that principle is my self-government, is rooted in me, and that I am self-governed by that principle, that I understand that principle, that it is scientifically understandable, that it is rooted in me, grounded in me, that it is my source of understanding everything, my spiritual understanding, that enables me to test everything, check everything, that I weigh everything in my experience and check it against that principle? Or do I still have to check with somebody on the phone, my teacher, my practitioner, with the church in Boston, to see if something is all right or not? That's rather sad. That really is sad. And so that's what I love about the fact that we are gathered here together, and that here and there are new individuals and new individuals who are interested in what we're doing, who are willing to listen, who are willing to devote 2 or 3 hours to come and reason about the things of Christian Science. Well, I want to take a moment just to state rather succinctly who I am, and what I represent, and what my foundation is. You know from the invitation that I am here in a certain office of representing the Kapler Institute for the Science of Being. And as such, I feel that I owe you a certain statement, a certain explanation of what that means, of who I am, of where I stand, and where the Institute stands in respect to Christian Science. And so I would begin by telling you that I and we accept as our only authority the Christian Science textbook and the Bible, the divine principle that is embedded and taught in those 2 textbooks. That I and we conceive of Christian Science as indeed the comforter to this age, the comforter that Jesus promised, and that I and we build on the fact that the textbook is the complete revelation of Christian Science, that it gives the complete science of Christian Science, that it contains, as Mrs. Eddy indicates, the complete revelation of the absolute divine principle of Christian Science. And that means that nothing can be added to that principle. nothing can be taken away from it. We are not here trying to add something to the textbook or to take something away from it. This is not necessary because it is complete, and that completeness of that principle only needs to be recognized, to be seen, to be understood. And so we accept that the textbook contains the full statement of Christian Science, and that no single aspect of that statement, of that text, is the main aspect or can be taken out of the context of the whole, however much one may love that particular aspect. So that every aspect, whether it's healing or demonstration or understanding or whatever it is that one is so drawn to in the subject, that subject must be seen within the context of the whole. It can never be taken out of the context of the whole. And so the Christian Science textbook is a holistic text. It is presenting a revelation that is whole, and it is presenting a science that is holistic. It presents a science that is holistic, and it presents the science of holism. And so we take Mrs. Eddy's revelation in a holistic way. We don't take a snatch here and a piece there and say, oh, I like this, and don't you like what she says here? And although you will hear me during this talk quoting from different parts of the textbook, different parts of Mrs. Eddy's writings, that when you see the whole of what I want to say to you, you will see that those parts are holistic, that they have been chosen holistically, that they fulfill a holistic role in the subject of the whole question that we are approaching today. So further, you see, many of these things have been criticisms about what we do, about what the Dorley-Kapler line does. One criticism is, well, they have a secret teaching. And you have to get in that group to find out what that secret teaching is. And I'm here to tell you today there is no secret teaching. It's an open book. That book is open. The moment we learn how to approach that text, the moment we see what it means to be a scientist, the moment we begin to realize the pith, the essence, the fundamentals that Mrs. Eddy has given to us in that text, it's an absolutely open book. And so there is no secret revelation apart from that which the textbook already contains. It contains that final revelation of the divine principle. And so we can say further that there are no additional revelators giving us more than what the textbook already contains. So let that set your mind at ease, that you are not encountering a group of individuals who claim to have a higher revelation, a further revelation, another revelation, something beyond what Mrs. Eddy has already given us. So that we have that final principle that stated in the textbook. But does that mean that all revelation comes to an end? Did all revelation come to an end when the final revelation of the divine principle was stated? No, not at all. You can see that any science, any discipline, any science so-called, goes on unfolding and unfolding and unfolding the idea of itself, the idea of its principle, whether that subject is mathematics or music or art or it can be anything. It can be video work, the art of video, the art of makeup, to be a makeup artist or whatever it is, that behind every subject is a principle, the principle of that subject. And that principle goes on and on revealing the idea of itself. This is why no discipline comes to an end. Why you could say, well, why didn't music stop when we reached Bach's era? Bach, oh, that music was so beautiful. Why didn't everything just stop there? But it didn't, did it? With every new age, you have a new form appearing of the idea of the principle behind that subject. And so it is with Christian Science, that to admit that the divine principle has been revealed in its completeness, in its fullness in the textbook, is not to admit that all revelation comes to an end. And so we have that wonderful story to tell you about the idea of the principle of Christian Science. And that's a story that has been going on since Mrs. Eddy left us. It didn't stop with Mrs. Eddy. The idea didn't stop when she left this plane of existence. But that idea, which is immaterial, goes on revealing and revealing and revealing itself without end. It goes on unfolding itself. So that, can you see that whatever is based on a principle is alive? It's a living thing. It's a dynamic thing. It is a moving thing. That the idea of the principle is life. That principle is life. You have that beautiful relationship between those two synonymous terms for God, principle and life, that the moment you touch the principle, you have life. We'll get into that a little bit further along. Another point we need to make then, and to set clear, because we are often accused of not being loyal, of having been disloyal to Boston or disloyal to the board of directors. Consequently, I suppose, disloyal to Mrs. Eddy. And so I must tell you that the moment you understand the principle of Christian Science, you find that you can no longer be loyal to people. No longer loyal to people. And so we are not loyal, and I am not loyal to any teacher. And I can sit up here and I can even say to you that representing the Kapler Institute and the Dorley Kapler line, that I can say to you that I am not loyal to John Dorley, that I am not loyal to Max Kapler. And Max Kapler would be the first one to throw his hat in the ring and say, yippee, hooray for that. I'm glad that I've been able to raise a student who does not have a personal allegiance, who is not personally loyal to me, but who understands the principle that I teach, the principle of Christian Science. And so we are not loyal to any line of individuals, to a personal sense of a revelator, to personal authorities, to human organizations or institutions. And you know that Mrs. Eddy said, follow your leader only so far as she follows the textbook. She took it right back to the textbook, took it right back to that divine principle. And so we must see that the supreme divine authority of the principle and science, which is given to us in the Christian Science textbook, is all that we can be loyal to. Mrs. Eddy said, "You can well afford to give me up, since you have in science and health your teacher and guide." Students who make science and health a study are in no danger of mistaking their way. So you see that we just become more and more safe, more and more secure, more and more free from a personal sense of Christian Science as we begin to understand the textbook in its teaching of the divine principle. So what has brought us here today? What has brought you here today is the true church. This is the subject of our talk, and you have come to find out what the true church is, the true church of Christian Science today. And I am telling you that what has brought you here is the true church that is within you. The structure of that true church that is within each one of us has drawn us here today. It's the kingdom of heaven within you. It's already within you. You know that right at the beginning of the textbook that Mrs. Eddy said, the time for thinkers has come. The time really to assert our God-given authority, our God-given man right, our inalienable right to be free and to look into what this principle is all about. Someone brought to my attention recently the fact that Mrs. Eddy was quite taken aback for the fact that they had tried to form a committee. You recall that they tried to form a committee back in, I think it was 1891, to tell Christian Scientists what they could read. And Mrs. Eddy caught this very quickly, and she said, I've got to say something about that issue. And so she wanted to put that information, she wanted to put her response into the journal, but the journal had already been printed. But she felt so strongly about it that she had a little card drawn up, a card that would be inserted into each journal that was printed. And this card then would go to everyone who purchased a journal or who was a subscriber to the journal, or whoever went into the reading room to read that journal. They would find this card in there by Mrs. Eddy. And what did she say on that card? She said, "I think it would have been wiser not to have organized the General Association for the Dispensing of Christian Science Literature. I consider my students as capable individually of selecting their own reading material, their own reading matter, and circulating it as a committee would be which is chosen for this purpose." She said, "I shall have nothing further to say on this subject, but hope my students' conclusions will be wisely drawn and tend to promote the welfare of those outside as well as inside this organization." So she felt very strongly that the individual was able to make these selections for themselves, to make this choice for themselves, to look into the whole question of what Christian Science is as an impersonal principle. Well, we want to now answer that question. What is the newly emerging form of the Christian Science Church today. What is love's promise? How is it being fulfilled? And you see that the meaning of that church involves our seeing the meaning of the Church of Christ Scientists. That's the name that Mrs. Eddy gave to her church. And in order for us to understand, therefore, what this church is, what its purpose is, what its intent is, we have to understand what the Church of Christ is. We want to see the true Christian Science Church. You notice that I put true in the invitation. What does it mean, true? It means to be consistent with fact or reality. Fundamental. To be true means essential. Exactly conforming to a pattern. In accordance with reality, fact, or truthfulness. And so the church that we look at today will be the true church, the one that conforms to reality, the one that conforms with truthfulness. So you see in your study material on the first page that I have given you a definition of church. This definition is from the electronic dictionary, the American Heritage Dictionary. And I had a marvelous time working with this subject and with that dictionary, and made the most amazing discovery that that dictionary is filled with definitions that are taken from Christian Science and from the Christian Science textbook. And so what you see here as a six-part definition, the sixth part of that definition being the definition according to Christian Science, is not, it's not the case that I have added number 6 and have put in Christian Science and what I have found in the textbook as Mrs. Eddy's definition, but this is the way it appears in the American Heritage Dictionary. So I'd like to go through that definition with you. We see that there is a range, there is a whole range of definition of that term church. Number 1, a building for public, especially Christian worship. 2, the company of all Christians, that is to say a spiritual body, you see, or a specific Christian denomination, a congregation. 3, public divine worship in a church, a religious service. 4, the clerical profession, the clergy. 5, ecclesiastical power as distinguished from the secular. 6, Christian Science, the structure of truth and love. Mary Baker Eddy. Do you hear that those definitions are all quite different from each other? They are unique from each other. But that when we come to the 6th definition, we feel as though we're somewhere else, as though we've left even the whole field or range of everything that's been covered in 1 through 5, that when we come to 6, we say, wait a minute, this is something completely new, completely different. And so what we have there is actually the definition of church, as Mrs. Eddy gives it in the Christian Science textbook, on page 583 in the glossary. And I will read the whole definition to you. Church, the structure of truth and love, whatever rests upon and proceeds from divine principle. And she goes on, The church is that institution which affords proof of its utility. You hear a change, almost as though the altitude drops, or that there is some kind of a translation now from that first initial statement about the structure of truth and love, whatever rests upon and proceeds from the divine principle, which is a completely immaterial definition of church. Now she comes almost as though to a further level and says the church is that institution which affords proof of its utility and is found elevating the race, rousing the dormant understanding. You hear as though it's a coming down and then a lifting up, coming down, lifting up. Elevating the race, rousing the dormant understanding from material beliefs to the apprehension of spiritual ideas and the demonstration of divine science, thereby casting out devils or error and healing the sick. I wonder if you can hear in just these two aspects that we've taken, these two definitions on this page, that we have different levels somehow implied, that we have different dimensions of church. You know that any subject today that is studied and approached in a progressive way, in a scientific way, is studied dimensionally, is seen dimensionally, is approached dimensionally. That the approaching of a subject dimensionally is that which is counter to reductionism, to what is called reductionism. In other words, the attempt to reduce something to just one thing. There is nothing that can be reduced to just one view, one aspect. That is reductionism. It's when we say a thing is nothing but. Man is nothing but this and this and this. And so every field takes the question, what is man? And the medical profession says man is nothing but this and this and this, blood and bones and physicality and so forth, and anatomy, etc. Psychology comes along and says man is nothing but a certain psychosis or a certain mental state. And so every discipline has attempted to approach a subject through the reductionism, through reductionism, by reducing something to nothing but this. Whereas dimensionalism says you can't do that. You have to see that man is all those things. If you're going to take man on that level, that man isn't just a psychosis. Man isn't just blood and bones and cartilage and all of those elements that are concerned in medicine and in anatomy. And so we have to see that every subject that we look at can be considered dimensionally, can be seen dimensionally. And we have a wonderful example of that right here in our definitions of church. And when you consider something dimensionally, you also see that you have a deep structure and you have surface structures. That you have, this is very much seen in, for instance, language. Perhaps you're aware of the study of language and of the transformational grammar, where they see that there is a deep structure that is to say, an abstract pattern that is underlying the construction of every surface structure of language. That the deep structure is that which governs the surface structure. And so a deep structure is defined as the abstract pattern which underlies the construction in the surface structure. A surface structure is defined as the formal structure as it actually occurs, as distinguished from the abstract underlying deep structure. So you see that what we have in our definitions is a selection of, an array of surface structures, and we have the deep structure, reality of what lies behind those surface structures. So that what we see in that definition is that a building, whether we have a building or we have the body, the Christian body, or we have the clergy, or we have the ecclesiastical power behind a church, that these are surface structures, but that what Christian Science presents is the deep structure reality. That Christian Science says church is the structure of truth and love. So we have the deep structure reality of the true church, which is the structure of truth and love, the structure and emanation of the divine principle. So actually it is the deep structure which governs everything at the surface structure level, no matter what level of surface structure we're talking about. The deep structure is that which governs absolutely, totally, completely everything at the surface structure. See, even if we see something we don't like at the surface structure, even if we see a sense of crisis or a sense of chaos going on with that loved church, with that cherished sense of church that we have held, we must begin to be scientists and see how a principle operates, how the divine principle operates. That the divine principle, the structure of truth and love, is the deep structure, and that is governing everything. And so the deep structure reality of the divine principle, whatever rests upon and proceeds from that divine principle, that deep reality is phenomenalized as all these other aspects of church that we see. That deep structure is the noumenon, then, of the phenomena that we see at the surface. And that noumenon, then, is bringing forth, so to say, the phenomenon. It is bringing forth the phenomenon, so to say, of an ecclesiastical organization. Or from another level, we may see that it is perceived as the field of Christian Science. You see, it may first be perceived as the denomination of Christian Science, that we call that church, the Church of Christian Science, the Christian Science Church. We think of the denomination, the individual Christian denomination of Christian Science. Or if we speak of the Church of Christian Science, we think of the entire body of Christian scientists, the movement, the cause, the field, we call it. This is the Church of Christian Science also. Or we speak of the church as the ecclesiastical hierarchy of government, in Boston, in the Christian Science organization, with all the people and positions and various degrees of importance that are implicate there. Or we may think of the actual physical building located at 5th and Hill or 3rd and Main or wherever that physical building is into which we enter to worship according to Christian Science. These are the phenomena. These are the surface structures. And you can see that we are very, very much concerned with surface structures. We are almost mesmerized. We've been almost mesmerized by the surface structure, missing the point that we must see what is the deep reality, what is the deep structure of church. And so we have to understand what definition we are talking about when we are talking about church. And we have to see that the deep meaning that Mrs. Eddy gave us is something quite different than what we are so overemphasizing today. That she gave us that deep meaning, and that she did not want us to confuse that deep structure meaning with the surface structure. The deep structure is changeless. The surface structure keeps on changing. Keeps on changing. It is changed by the changeless. The deep structure is that which causes every change in the surface structure that we see. Think of it. Every upheaval, every crisis, every disruption, every tendency that looks like a breakdown is governed by the principle at the deep structure level. So that the crisis that we see in the Christian Science Church today at the surface level is something very, very beautiful at work. It is the deep structure church working on the surface structure church. The deep structure church working on the surface structure church. And it is the Church of Christ, scientist, the Church of Christ. How do we find, what do we find in the textbook? What does the textbook teach us that the Christ means? What is the definition of the Christ? Actually, she gives many definitions of the Christ. Actually, she defines the Christ dimensionally. She defines every great subject and theme dimensionally, according to levels of consciousness. And so that great, great subject of the Christ is one that we can see from many, many different standpoints and angles and levels to get the fullness, the full meaning of what the Christ is. And we would need to do that to see what she means by the Church of Christ. And we do know, we know right off really the top of our heads what she says about the Christ, because she says what? It is the divine manifestation of God, which comes to the flesh to destroy incarnate error. She shows really that the Christ is the saving aspect of the divine, that the Christ is that which comes to the human, that it is bringing truth to the human, that it is changing the human. Whenever you investigate the subject of the Christ, you find that it has all to do with the translatability of being, that that principle can translate itself, that it can come in every situation, to every individual need, to every individual circumstance. It is that which is dynamic, which is constantly moving. It's the fact that the principle is moving, moving, moving to establish its idea. This is the Christ. And so is it any wonder that it is that deep reality of the Church of Christ that is overthrowing the old form of church at the surface level? That is what is going on. And so our understanding and our demonstration of truth and love, of the divine principle, our understanding of that looks at first to us like a material structure. Our first faint understanding of that deep reality looks to us like a material structure. It looks like an organic structure. It looks like something that is humanly organized. It looks like a body of human organization. What is that looks like that? It's our own faintly appearing understanding of the divine principle. It's our own faintly appearing understanding of the structure of truth and love. And as the Church of Christ, the deep structure, works on consciousness, as it is working on consciousness, that's the office of the Christ. When we say to come, we mean it is constantly working and working. You know how the Bible depicts that, I will turn, overturn, until he come whose right it is. I'm going to overturn and overturn, you see, consciousness until the fact is established, the true fact, the true reality, the deep structure is established. As your concept of church is coincident with the divine principle's concept of church. So we may see our beloved, cherished, present form of church undergoing a crisis. The church in Boston, the branch churches, the ecclesiastical government, the field, the movement of that church. And because we are Christian Scientists, we tend to say, this is wrong. This shouldn't be happening. I'm a Christian Scientist. We are Christian Scientists. We should have harmony. We should have harmony. We should have peace. We should have ever-present fulfillment. You see, that's usually what you hear the Christian Scientist say. Actually, you hear it every time a Christian Scientist has a problem. He says, this is not right. I should not have a problem. I should not have a problem. This shouldn't be happening. This isn't happening. That's the other one you hear. This isn't happening. It's a complete shutting out, a complete denial that anything is happening at all because it is perceived as something that is bad, that is not good, that is bringing decay or destruction or overturning, and so we don't like that, and so we jump into our absolute level, our absolute standpoint, and we say, this isn't happening. This can't be happening. Or we say, all right, it is happening, and we have to fix it. We've got to fix it. We've got to clean this thing up and get it back to what it was before. Mm-hmm. Return it to what it used to be. Not realizing that it is the changeless fact of the true church, the principle of this church, the timeless and indestructible structure of the Church of Christian Science, which is the cause of the demise of the old form, which is bringing the demise of the old form, and which is working out the purposes of good only, which is urging on us not destruction, but a higher form, a more holy form, which is urging upon us the evolution of the idea of the true church in consciousness. This is what is actually going on. Do you like that? Mm-hmm. I like that too. I love that. I think that's the most beautiful thing, the most loving thing. Mm-hmm. And why does the surface structure keep on changing? Let's just reiterate that again if I didn't make that point clear. Why does the surface structure keep on changing? Because it is being worked upon, impacted by the Christ. We've already seen, well, what is the Christ? It's the fact that the principle is dynamic, that the principle has an idea, you see. And so the principle at the deep structure is dynamically impacting every level of phenomena, every level of surface phenomena, in such a way as to overturn it, and to bring out as a final form the coincidence with the deep structure, coincidence with the true structure. And if you know from the textbook what Mrs. Eddy says about the Christ, especially in the highest teaching that she gives in the platform, where she gives the teaching of divine science, she brings out there that the Christ is all to do with the coincidence, that the Christ is that which is establishing the coincidence between God and man. And that's what the Church of Christ is working out. So can you see that church is a state of consciousness? That your concept of church, your perception of church, is a state of consciousness. And the only crisis is that one which comes from trying to hold on to that which is outgrown, to a concept of church which is outgrown. And the Christ is breaking that down. The Christ science is breaking that down. So that if there is a state of consciousness that is not fully developed, not very advanced, not progressive, not dynamic, and it tends to want to hold back to an old form, to keep an old form, to shore up an old form, an old stage, a former stage, it is not allowed to do that. It is not allowed to do that. Why? Because this is the Church of Christ. It's a terrific thing. Because when you touch the Christ, you touch the whole dynamic of being. You touch the whole fact that, you see, the principle of Christian Science is the principle, the infinite principle. It is the principle of everything. And therefore, if we see that the Christ is the dynamic of that principle, if the Christ means that that principle is not static, is not asleep, is not unmoving, but is constantly manifesting itself, then that Christ is the dynamic that is at work in everything, absolutely everything. I love that. I can't help but bring that in, although it's much further on in my talk, to see that that Christian Science and the principle of Christian Science cannot be confined, cannot be contained within the walls of the Mother Church. It cannot be confined and contained within the little denomination of Christian Scientists, a little field of Christian Scientists. But it is a universal principle. Christian Science is alive and well and living in the world. Wake up. Wake up. The whole universe is Christian Science. The whole universe is the operation of this principle, of this infinite principle. And so the whole universe is, in a sense, the Church of Christ, the structure of truth and love. Whatever rests upon and proceeds from the divine principle, the whole universe proceeds from that divine principle. The whole universe is the phenomenalization, the creation of that divine principle. So let's widen and expand our sense of what Christian Science is, and not think we have to keep it tight and narrow and little and held in those four walls of a church, of a physical structure, of a building, or of an ecclesiastical form. Because it's breaking out. Believe me, it's breaking out. And the world will pass us by, will pass by the old-time Christian Scientist and the old-time belief of what Christian Science is. The world moves on, the idea, the principle moves on. Are we going to hang back, hold back to an old form? Well, you can try. You can try. You can, because you can always go with the principle, or you can dig in your toes and try to resist and resist and resist, but it won't work. And what do we see when we try to dig in the toes and it doesn't work? We see crisis. That's all that a crisis is the tendency to try to hold on to the old form when this is not possible. And so there is a breaking down of the old form, because the new form will come in. It will come in. Evolution is the nature. Evolution is spirit, is a quality of spirit, is the effect of spirit. Evolution is not the evolution of matter. Evolution is the story of the giving way of matter, the falling away of material constraints, the falling away of a limited concept. And so everything has its evolution. And the Christian Science Church has its evolution. That evolution is the falling away of the limited sense of what the Church of Christian Science is. It's the falling away of the limited view that we have of that divine principle. Well, you see, now I don't know where I am. But I'm being myself, and I can't help doing that, and just
you know that?
cooking, huh? Yeah. I love in the preface where she speaks of that divine principle, the divine principle of healing. She says that it is Emmanuel. That's the Christ, isn't it? Huh? It is Emmanuel, God with us, God with us, a divine influence, ever present in human consciousness. That's where everything is going on, in consciousness. There's nothing out there. Weren't you always told that? I was taught that from a little child. My mother taught me that as a fundamental lesson in Christian Science, that there is nothing out there, that everything is within you. And you know, when you're little, you try to grasp that and you can't imagine what that means, but as you grow and mature in the teaching of Christian Science, you begin to understand that all is consciousness, that everything is going on in consciousness, that consciousness determines experience, that human consciousness is a moving thing, a dynamic thing, that it has a dynamic within it. It is constantly changing and growing. And so here she says that divine principle is Emmanuel. It is God with you. It is that which is ever present in your human consciousness, in the human consciousness. Coming now, as was promised aforetime, repeating itself. She says there's something about repeating itself. Repeating, just think that principle is repeating and repeating and repeating itself. It's the only thing that comes. It's the only thing that is at work on us. What happens when we experience that repetition? Is that a very boring, stale thing? Does that just take us, right to the doldrums where we feel there's nothing new going on? Just that same old principle repeating and repeating itself. Is that what happens? No. No. It's infinite newness. That principle is moving us on, moving us forward, advancing us, bringing us progress, bringing us newness of life. Just as you see in every discipline, that the moment you touch up the principle of that discipline, the moment you identify yourself with the fundamentals of that discipline, of that science, whatever science, small s it seems to be, that you are open to the newness within that subject, that you are become a part of the movement of the idea of that principle, that you experience the infinite variety of that subject, the creativity of that subject, the newness of that subject. That's life. Again, we have that wonderful relationship of principle and life. That principle is life. If you want life, if you want a new sense of life, a full sense of existence, get the principle. What was it? Wasn't it Solomon who said, with all thy getting, get understanding? But you think you want to get this and you want to get that, and you know we have those periods in our life that we go through where we think we need this and we want that and we want to demonstrate this. If we're Christian Scientists, naturally we want to demonstrate it in Christian Science. We want to demonstrate a job and a home and a family and a car and a good bank account and all that stuff. You see. But Solomon had it. He said, with all thy getting, get an understanding. And we learn from our experiences. We learn from all our experiences, all our mistaken attempts to demonstrate Christian Science, all our attempts to use Christian Science to get what we think we should demonstrate. We learn that what we really need to demonstrate is the principle. What we really need to demonstrate is an understanding of the principle. What we really want is that true church, that true understanding of the structure of truth and love and the principle. So this Emmanuel, this Christ, this Church of Christ is at work throughout the whole of human consciousness. It isn't just at work in the field of Christian Scientists. It's at work in the whole of human consciousness. Individually, in every individual consciousness, therefore collectively, and therefore universally. It's at work consciously and unconsciously, meaning that it is at work whether we are conscious of it or not. If we are conscious of it, yes, it is working. If we are unconscious of it, it is working anyway. This is the nature of the Christ. This is the meaning of the Christ. And so just because a discipline or a certain movement or a certain religion or a certain individual mentality wants to hold back and hang back, refuses to go forward, this doesn't mean that they won't go forward because of that Christ dynamic working in consciousness. So we see the effects of that. We see the effects of progress, the effects of the workings of the true church. You know, Mrs. Eddy knew this. She knew it right from the beginning. She didn't intend her church to be held in a limited form, in a narrow form. And if you research her writings, you find that there. You see that. You see it so clearly, black on white. Look, for instance, in retrospection and introspection, where she tells the story and the evolution, really, of her college and her church. She says there, at a meeting of the Christian Scientists Association on April 12, 1879, it was voted to organize a church to commemorate the words and works of our Master, a mind-healing church without a creed, to be called the Church of Christ Scientist, the first such church ever organized. When I was its pastor and in the pulpit every Sunday, my church increased in members. You hear the different uses of the term church. My church increased in members, and its spiritual growth kept pace. Its spiritual growth kept pace with its increasing popularity. But when obliged, because of accumulating work in the college, to preach only occasionally, no student at that time was found able to maintain the church in its previous harmony and prosperity. She couldn't find someone to maintain that standard, to carry that standard. Examining the situation prayerfully and carefully, noting the church's need and the predisposing and exciting cause of its condition, I saw that the crisis had come. She saw the crisis at that time. At this juncture, I recommended that the church be dissolved. This was her first church. You know that she had two churches, that she organized the church, and she also had the charter for her college, and that then she asked them to dissolve the church. That's what she's talking about here. Only later was the church reorganized, organized again, against her best understanding, against her instructions, and against really her highest wishes. It was reorganized. But she's showing here the quality of the church at that time. She said, at this juncture, I recommended the church be dissolved. No sooner were my views made known than the proper measures were adopted to carry them out, the votes passing without a dissenting voice. This measure was immediately followed by a great revival of mutual love, prosperity, and spiritual power. The true church didn't go anywhere. It was revived. It came out more and more and more. Spiritual power, yes. The history of that hour holds this true record. Adding to its ranks and influence, this spiritually organized church. Spiritually organized. Apparently there is another sense of organization than just the material sense of organization. This spiritually organized Church of Christ Scientist in Boston still goes on. A new light broke in upon it, and more beautiful became the garments of her who bringeth good tidings that publisheth peace. Despite the prosperity of my church, she learned something from it, that material organization has its value and peril, and that organization is requisite only in the earliest periods of Christian history. Think of it. Only in the earliest periods of Christian history. If we feel we have to have that organization, we know that in our own individual development of consciousness that we are in the early periods of development. That as those periods go on, as we develop and evolve, that we see that we do not need the material form of organization. Organization is requisite only in the earliest periods of Christian history. After this material form of cohesion and fellowship has accomplished its end, continued organization retards spiritual growth and should be laid off. Even as the corporeal organization, the corporeal organization, deemed requisite in the first stages of mortal existence, is finally laid off for the deep structure, for the deep structure, in order to gain spiritual freedom and supremacy. From careful observation and experience came my clue to the uses and abuses of organization, she says. And so, once again, we have to see everything that she said about church, everything that she said about church organization, and not just pull out those references, those quotes, those things that support what we would like to get across. As the organization will do, they will pull out everything that supports the continuation of that form. They will pull out of the context of the whole of her writings, everything she ever said and taught and did, only that which supports continuing with the old form. This is not scientific. As a scientist, we must take in the whole body of information. We must take in everything that she has said about that subject of church and church organization. And what does she say? She says that it has a place. It has a place in the early stages of development. But that once you have gone beyond the early stages of development, it can retard your spiritual growth. It can hold you back. Therefore, lay it off, because there is something higher and deeper. And in this way, we get the full range. We get the real place value of our church experience, the real place value of what it is to be the member of the mother church, a member of a branch church, to work on the committees, to take part as reader or as a librarian or in the reading room or whatever it is, that all those beautiful experiences have their place. But that when we advance, as we are evolved by the Church of Christ, as we are evolved by the dynamic of the Church of Christ within our own consciousness, within consciousness collectively and universally, that when I was a child, I spake as a child, but now I'm a man and I put away childish things. This should not sound harsh to us. It should be welcome to us. It should be welcome to us that there is something higher, something more to Christian Science than just what we have seen so far. And we must always feel that way. We must always know that. We must always know that we haven't reached it, that it is constantly evolving, that the idea of the principle is constantly evolving. Never feel, well, we've got it and the other guy doesn't. That idea is ever on the move. Mrs. Eddy was asked in 1901, how will the Church of Christ Scientist be governed after all now concerned in its government shall have passed on? In other words, what's going to happen when you're gone? What's going to happen when Mrs. Eddy leaves, when the present government leaves, and so forth? And she says, it will evolve scientifically. It will evolve scientifically. This is from First Church of Christ Scientist and Miscellany or Miscellany on page 342. So that she could see that the evolution of her true church, the thing that she really founded, which is the divine principle, has an evolution, has a future, but that its evolution is scientific. It will evolve scientifically. And so the Church of Christian Science as we experience it today, the field of Christian Science as we experience it today is, the government, you see, depends, the government of that church depends on the spiritual level of the Christian Scientist's scientific understanding. And not on the board of directors. Not on how competent a board we can get, or how experienced a board we can get, or how that board is equipped to run the whole picture, or to handle the financial situation, or even to do adequate metaphysical work for the whole field. Doesn't depend on that at all. It depends on the individual consciousness of the Christian Scientist and how well established the scientific understanding of Christian Science is in that consciousness. In the textbook, when you research the textbook to see what she says about church, you find that she says, our church is built on the divine principle love. Only in the preface does she speak about the establishing of her church, that she was the pastor of the first established Church of Christ Scientist, that she had a college, what she did with the college and how prosperous it was and how prosperous the church was and so forth. But when she gets into the structure of the textbook, into the body of the textbook, into the text itself of the teaching of the principle of Christian Science, she says, our church is built on the divine principle love. We can unite with this church. How? By filling out an application? By getting 3 people to sign for you, or whatever it takes? We can unite with this church only as we are newborn of spirit, as we reach the life which is truth, and the truth which is life, by bringing forth the fruits of love. Jesus established his church, as she says further on in the text, and maintained his mission on a spiritual foundation of Christ healing. he taught his followers that his religion had a divine principle. Isn't that terrific? Which would cast out error and heal. So, always remember that. Always remember that the deep structure is at work, that the deep structure is governing the surface structure. Isn't that the most loving thing? To see that that divine principle is love, and that love is working something through, working something out, that love's promise is being fulfilled. You see, it's always love which has an idea, which holds an idea, which contains an idea, which knows the plan, holds the plan, contains the blueprint for everything. You know, that love and love's idea are one. And so love is working out that idea. Love's promise, therefore, is being fulfilled. That love can never be deprived. It will not be deprived of its manifestation and object. It will not be deprived of the manifestation of that true consciousness of church. It's working out the purposes of good only. And here it is that that divine principle is love, love, love. Well, throughout history, mankind has been looking for that principle. Looking for that true structure, that deep structure. Looking for a structure really in which to enter. You see, because once we have a structure, we want to be in that structure, to be one with that structure. A structure in which to enter to serve God. That's so true that one sees it throughout the history of the Judeo-Christian line. If we take the Judeo-Christian line really as an example of the history of civilization, or a spiritual history, the spiritual history of civilization is characterized through the Judeo-Christian line, then one sees that in a very pronounced way, this is the fact, that man has always been looking for this structure. The Bible presents the story of our spiritual history and the evolution of that spiritual history through the whole text from Genesis to Revelation. It shows that search. It shows that search through periods, through states and stages of evolution, showing really states and stages of the evolution of consciousness, or the refining of that consciousness of what the true structure is. Begins with Genesis, with the days of creation, and fulfills that line at the close of St. John's Revelation. And at that point we come into a fifth stage, or we complete a fifth stage and enter into a sixth stage. What are these stages that I'm talking about? Another term for them is 1,000-year periods. They are stages which take the form of 1,000-year periods. And so we can see that we have gone through 6 of these 1,000-year periods of recorded history, and of the history and evolution of the spiritual idea. So we see that the Bible ends in the 5th 1,000-year period, with the 5th 1,000-year period, that 5th 1,000-year period is completed in the period from AD 1, 2, 3, whatever they say. I think there's some discrepancy that some say Jesus was born in 4 AD. So in the period from the time of Jesus to that 1000, the year 1000, was the 5th 1,000-year period. And then we come into the 6,000-year period and into the age of Christian Science, of the discovery of Christian Science, and the age of the textbook. And at every major point across that whole line, that whole span of development, always a new form arose, a new structure arose, so that you have an evolution of that idea of the attempt of man, the desire of man, the inclination of a man, of the individual consciousness to find that perfect structure in which to worship God, in which to adore that adorable one. How can I most perfectly adore that adorable one? It's the concept of church that was evolving. They didn't call it a church in the early part of the Bible, because that term church only came up at the time of Jesus' time, when he formed the church, or the body of individuals who followed that line, who rooted themselves on the same foundation which he founded himself on, the divine principle. And you know that the first instance of the term church being used in the Bible is when he was speaking to Simon Bar-Jonah, and he asked Simon, who do you say I am? Who do you think I am? What do you think I am? What am I? Am I someone like John the Baptist, or am I Elias, or as they were saying, and nobody could get this identity right? And Simon said, "Thou art the Christ." He said it, "You are the Christ." This wasn't generally acknowledged. You have to realize that. If you study the Gospels, you realize there's a whole evolution of the realization, the coming into conscious awareness of the fact that Jesus is the Christ. He's the Christ. And so here you have the first instance of the acknowledgement of that by Simon Bar-Jonah. And it's at that point that Jesus says to him, he calls him Peter. Doesn't call him Simon Bar-Jonah. His name is changed to Peter, which is from the Greek, or is the root of it is in the Greek, Petros, meaning rock, or stone, or calculus. That Jesus said, upon this rock, upon this acknowledgement, I can build my church. You see, upon this consciousness, the conscious consciousness that you know that I am the idea of the principle, that I am the Christ idea. On that I build my church. And that was the coming in of the term church. But going all the way back, the first 1,000-year period, the second 1,000-year period, the third 1,000-year period of that development, that spiritual evolution, that spiritual development, was this attempt to find the structure, to define that structure. So what does that look like? I just wanted to say one or two more words about this concept of 1,000-year periods. This is not something that we have made up. It is actually a concept that is well known in the Jewish faith, in the Jewish religion. And it is perhaps helpful to see that in 2 Peter you have that rendering that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. And so as we look at the Bible, as we look at the very opening of the Bible, we find the first 1,000-year period, but before we find the first 1,000-year period, we find something else. We find another text, and that text is called the record of creation, the days of creation. How many days of creation are there? 7, huh? 7 days of creation. Actually, this is what John Dorley could see and what he began to nurture from the early teens of this century. He kept going over those days of creation. And he could somehow see this is the seed plot for the whole Bible. Seed plot meaning what? Let's bring it into modern language. Let's bring it up to date. The pattern. This is the pattern for the whole Bible. So that when Peter said, one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day, he was giving a clue to the fact that the 1,000-year periods are patterned by the days of creation, that the pattern that we find in the days of creation is that which is itself timeless, because those days are days of timelessness. They are values of timelessness, and they stamp time. They stamp everything that goes through time. They pattern everything that goes through time. And so one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, so that the first day is stamping the first 1,000-year period. The second day is stamping the second 1,000-year period. The third day is patterning the third 1,000-year period. And so on, all the way through up to our present age. And where do we stand? What is our present age? We are at the close of the 6,000-year period, and the coming in of the 7,000-year period, the coming in of that seventh day standpoint. And we see that we are moving in a great pattern, according to a great pattern, and that actually every evolution moves through this pattern. Every evolution, which is what? Something that goes through time, huh? Whenever you have an evolution, you have a development across time, across a time scale. So that every development that goes across a time scale is patterned by the timeless scale of the days of creation. John Dorley could see that that was the law of creativity, that in Genesis, those 7 days present the law of creativity. And so you have that pattern stamping the evolution of this question of structure, this question of church across the 1,000-year periods. I want to say you have an absolutely beautiful presentation of this in a book, a pamphlet, a good-sized pamphlet by Peggy Brooke of London, England, entitled The True Church. What does that evolution look like? You can see that in the first 1,000-year period, you have a very definite attempt to find that structure, to have a symbol for that relationship that you want to have to God. And it's the first faint appearing in the first 1,000-year period, because remember, we're still in the false record of creation, you see, comes in the first 1,000-year period. We're in the Garden of Eden. And what is the structure there? It's the tree of life, isn't it? The tree of life was that first attempt to symbolize the deep structure. You have always appearing at the same time the counterfeit, a counterfeit. So that the tree of life, which was in the midst of the garden, was that wonderful breaking in of the sense of life, of that principle which is life. You could just take that symbol and see how it is treated, how Mrs. Eddy treats it, how you have that wonderful rendering that the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nation, as though to show that that tree is the principle which has all the leaves, any leaf, every leaf, for the healing of the nations, for the healing of the whole world, the whole world. And counterfeit to that, also, strangely enough, in the midst of the garden, how can you have two trees exactly in the midst of the garden, except they be the same tree, really? But if we don't understand the tree of life, we perceive it as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And that was the structure, the counterfeit structure symbol. I'm just going to quickly go through these just so you feel how that whole question of structure was evolving to the point of seeing church, of bringing out this sense of church as the structure of truth and love. In the second 1,000-year period, you have as the symbol Noah's Ark. You recall that in that second 1,000-year period, the great positive symbol was Noah and that ark, that he was asked to build an ark, that ark was a wonderful symbol of structure. It had 3 levels, and it had a window on top, not a window on the side, but on top, to open to heaven, a window that opened to heaven. As the counterfeit symbol in that period, you had the Tower of Babel. You know that story of the Tower of Babel, and it's too much to go into now, but it was the counterfeit of that beautiful ark, which Mrs. Eddy defines as, say, the understanding of spirit destroying belief in matter. And with the Tower of Babel, you had really that opposite sense of confusion, of not the order of spirit and the diversification, classification, individualization of spirit, but that chaotic sense of everybody speaking their own language, no one understanding anybody else, and so forth. So it was the counterfeit symbol. When we come to the third 1,000-year period, the structure there changed. You see how it changed? You don't have the tree of life in the third period. You don't have the ark in the third period. You have another symbol, a symbol that appears in the exact form that is needed for the age in which it appears. So here it is, this symbol, the tabernacle. The tabernacle becomes the structure symbol. Tabernacle of the wilderness. You know, that tabernacle was not something that was fixed and grounded some place at some time. It was that sense of moving, being on the move, as you have in the third 1,000-year period, all that sense of moving, of the wilderness experience, the wandering experience of moving towards the promised land. And so that tabernacle of the wilderness was a type and symbol for something that in reality was much deeper, much higher. We know that the instructions for the tabernacle were given by God, that it was a pattern. It was the pattern shown to thee upon the mount. And so it's a symbol that is highly ordered. You hear that there's more order coming in to the whole thing. You know that, for instance, you had the outer court, the inner court, the instruments, all that refining and refining of what that structure is, of getting a clearer, more defined, more delineated sense of what that structure is, in which to enter and to worship God. You see, it was the search for that structure. In the counterfeit, what did you have? You had the golden calf. Wasn't that the other side of the coin? That when they were dissatisfied with Moses and with what was going on, things weren't moving enough, and they fell back into their old ways. Yes, they held back to their old ways, huh? We want to go back to the flesh pots of Egypt. Take us back. We don't like this wandering business, you see. That sense of moving into something new is very uncomfortable. It's sometimes much more comfortable to the human to stay with the flesh pots of Egypt, to go back, to hold to the old symbol. And so how was that reflected in their experience? By the making, the forming of this golden calf, which they worshipped. It was a symbol for false worship. Then you come to the 4,000-year period. You don't have the tabernacle anymore. You have the temple. So that the temple supersedes now the tabernacle, that temple in Jerusalem. You know that the 4,000-year period, if you don't know, I'll tell you that you know, and then I'll tell you what you know. And that is that was the kingdom period, as well as the prophetic age. It was that period in which the temple was not only built but destroyed. It was that period in which Israel and Judah were taken into captivity and had nothing. They had no material symbol. They could take no material symbol with them. It was a terrific period in which they had nothing to fall back on but their consciousness of the divine principle and the idea of that principle. It was a terrifically rich period, actually a period in which, if you know anything about the Bible and the formation, the compilation of the Bible, you know that the priestly documents were all written during that time of captivity, and the priestly documents were those documents that included the days of creation. Funny, huh? We open the Bible and we really start with something that was revealed in the 4,000-year period. The principle of the whole thing was revealed to them in the fourth period of development. And then they could see what was always there from the beginning, what was really running the whole show from the beginning. And so then they were brought back from captivity, you know, that the temple was rebuilt, and then it was later sacked again. As a counterfeit of the temple, you had the high places. The high places being those places where everyone who didn't worship in the temple worshipped in the high places. They worshipped not the one God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one God, but they had other gods. They had that coming in of being influenced by other cultures, other nations, a mixing of everything, to the degree that their worship was not in the temple. It didn't have that pure sense of worshiping the one God, but in the high places, where which were usually up on a hill and with many trees, and this was symbolic of a false worship.